Welcome. Thanks for joining us in this webinar about the tenancy law reform changes. I just first of all wanted to acknowledge that we're all calling in from land that's traditional Aboriginal land. I'm calling from Darramurrugal country in the north of what's now Sydney, but the Tenants Union works across land all the way across what's now New South Wales. Our offices are on Gadigal country of the Eora Nation, but we pay respects to the owners of all the lands that we work on, live on, play on, and that we work with communities of all sorts
Are
across
you
the whole
sharing your
of
screen?
our land. We wanted to have this webinar because we've passed the year mark of the tenancy law changes that they started in May last year. Uh, they were really significant changes. They were a big moment that was particularly around the eviction reforms, the switching from no grounds evictions to a list uh, of reasonable grounds was this piece of work that the Tenants Union and many others had been working on for many, many decades. Really significant, laying the groundwork for a fairer renting system. But there were a lot of other changes that came through at the same time. And so we wanted to recap what's changed, but we also wanted to hear a year in how it's been going for renters, what's been happening for you, what's changed, and what you need to see going forward. So, this is really a bit of a two-way conversation. We'll share some of our knowledge, some of the rules that have changed, but we're also really keen to hear from you. You might have heard when you came in, and you might see the tag across the top. We are recording this session, and that's so that people who couldn't make it, on Monday at lunchtime can still join in, can still learn about these changes. It'll be up on YouTube. We'll share clips here and there. So we are recording. If towards the end somebody wants to speak, somebody wants to share, we probably will put up a title card that shows the question asked so that we can respond to it, but you don't have to worry about being recorded. Doesn't matter how you look, you can be as casual as you like, and we don't need to worry about your privacy being invaded that way. So we do hope to share and share the whole chat. The chat is on off to the side if you want to ask a question as we go. If you want to react to something that people are saying, you can do that. Particularly the questions during. If they are little quick clarifications, we might stop and clarify, but you can also ask big questions and we'll have time at the end to really dig into those and have that conversation. So feel free to put anything you need in the chat. We'll respond, depending on how it goes with the flow of the presentation. And look, hopefully this will be really useful and interesting for everybody. So let's kick into it. Uh, as I said, we're going to go through what's changed. Then we'll talk about the things that we already know are coming, that are on government's agenda, that might be going through Parliament, but aren't live yet. Then we'll talk about the gaps, the things that haven't been addressed, that certainly that we know from our experience talking to and hearing from renters are needed. And then your experience, what you've been seeing, and what you hope to change into the future, how these changes have been affecting you. And I'm joined today by Liv, who is our Advocacy Officer here at the Tenants Union. And Liv's going to do a lot of the talking through these changes, explaining what they are. So if we move on to what's changed, and can I introduce Liv?
Hi everyone, my name's Liv, as Leo said. So there have been some really big changes, as Leo outlined, over the last year or so. Um, some of them you might have heard of on mainstream media, some of them you might not have heard of. So next slide, P Rose. So we've broken it down into the five kind of main things that we think are important to talk about. The first change was the increase cap. So it's not a cap on the amount that rent can be increased, but the frequency that rent can be increased. Previously, there was restrictions on some types of termination notice, types of rent increase notices, and types of agreement. Now it's across the spectrum. So it's across all types of agreement, mainly, whether or not you go from a periodic agreement, a fixed term agreement to a periodic agreement, all kinds of combinations of agreements or leases. Your rent can only be increased once every 12 months. So this is a really pivotal change. That began in 2024. So another one, which is really just a kind of clarification of some rules that were already in place. But you can't be required to pay fees to do an application for a rental property, and you can't be required to pay a fee to do a background check by your real estate agent or a private landlord or even a third party like an app or like a third party that provides services to either of those. So what we think is the most important change is the change to no grounds evictions or no fault evictions. That a landlord has to have a legal reason to end a tenancy now in New South Wales. That is at the end of a fixed term, during a periodic, all the time. They need a reason to end your tenancy. So this is a groundbreaking change in the law in New South Wales. We're super excited about it. The next one is pets. So it's not that pets are always allowed and they have to be allowed. It's that there's now a structured process, that application form and process that needs to be applied. So it does mean that pets in rental properties. So the Tenants Union is very pro-pet. We think that pets are part of families and they're super important to tenants' lives. Lots of tenants' lives, so that's made that process easier. So you have to be offered, the last one is you have to be offered a fee-free way to pay your rent. So I'll get into more detail of that later, but essentially, if you want to pay your rent by bank transfer or centre pay or a way that doesn't incur fees, you need to be able to do that. All right, so we spoke about end of no grounds evictions. This is really the kind of breakdown of what that is. There's lots of different ways to talk about it. We say no grounds eviction, nothing to do with actual earth, so there needs to be a legal reason to end your tenancy, and that legal reason is specified. So there's certain categories of reasons that a landlord has to use now. And not only does there have to be that legal reason, it has to have certain evidence that is attached to the termination notice. So if you receive a termination notice under the changes, and for example, say that the landlord is saying we're going to demolish the property. So that's our legal reason that we're giving you for why you have to move out. So they can't just say that's just it. It's just we're just going to demolish the property. You have to trust us. You have to take our word for it. They have to provide certain evidence. And it's not like down the track they have to provide it. When you receive that notice of termination, there has to be what's called a termination information statement that is attached to that termination notice. And it has to also include the prescribed evidence. So there's not just made up evidence, it is prescribed. So it's very specific what that evidence needs to be. Now, we don't expect you to go and have a look at the legislation and figure all of this out. It's actually all over the place. It's kind of some of it's in the regulations, some of it's in the legislation. So what we've done is we've condensed it into fact sheets that you on our website, so tenants.org.au. If you want to know anything about the changes to no grounds eviction, you can go there and get lots of information. It's really easy to read. It's really easy to digest. But if you're still kind of reading through it and you still have questions about whether or not you've received the right termination notice, or if it has the right evidence attached to it, or maybe it's got evidence attached to it, but you don't think that the evidence is genuine, then the best place to call is your local tenants advice and advocacy service. So there is a tenants advice and advocacy service that give free legal advice, specialists in residential tenancy law for every single suburb in the entire state. So if you go to our website, tenants.org.au, and put in and press the button Get Advice, then it will show you the number for the local service or how to get in contact with them. Sometimes it's better to go through their web form. It's just a quicker way of getting in contact with them, and they will call you back with some legal advice on your specific circumstances. All right. So this is the process that you can go through. If you receive a notice of termination, you can apply this process, or you can just go to our website or just directly call the Tenants Advice and Advocacy Service. You don't have to go through these steps. But this is a good place to start. So you need to check the notice carefully. Does it include the reason? So there has to be a reason. They can't just say, we just want you to move out. Like, it doesn't work like that anymore. They have to provide you with a reason, and there's certain reasons. So does it have the reason? Does it have the evidence? And is the reason one of the ones that's set out in the legislation? You can do that by going to our website and checking the reason you've been given. Because if it's an invalid notice, you might not have to move out. You might be able to challenge it, or when it gets to the tribunal for termination of possession orders, you might be able to challenge it there. So it's real. You don't have to move out once you receive a notice. You can challenge it. You can get advice about whether or not it's a correct notice. So is the notice period correct? Most notices of termination are going to be 90-day termination notices for what's called a periodic agreement. So like if it's a rolling agreement, the fixed term has ended, you're now in the periodic agreement. But again, for all of those timeframes, like the notice that you need to be given, you can go to our website and double check that, or you can call a tenants advocate and double check that. So number 4, most important, free and confidential advice from a tenants advocate. These guys are experts in what they do. They know this stuff back to front. They will be able to give you comprehensive advice about what your rights are and what you have to do next. So if the notice is invalid, there is an opportunity to make an application to the tribunal, or you can also challenge it when the landlord makes an application to the tribunal. But if you are going to do that, if you do think it's not a valid reason, they haven't given us the correct evidence, I would call your local tenants advice and advocacy service to get advice on how to go about that. The best thing to do is to call them as soon as possible. Don't call them the day before the date in the notice. Call them as soon as you get the notice. Start gathering information as soon as you get it. Okay, so the keeping of pets. Previously in New South Wales, if a landlord didn't want you to have a pet, they could just refuse. They could just say, no, we don't want you to have a pet. We just don't want pets in our rental property. That process has changed. If a landlord doesn't want you to have a pet, they need to provide you with reasons. So you can, and those reasons need to be within the legislated reasons. So say you move in to a rental property, you decide you want to get a pet, you still need the landlord's permission. So you have to still get the permission. You can't just not get permission. You have to fill in the online form, and then the landlord has 21 days to respond to that. So they have to respond in a way that's kind of set out in the legislation. And if they don't respond after 21 days, it's deemed, or it's assumed that you have that you have permission to have that pet. So it's kind of like a default setting. They have to, if they do respond within that 28 days, it has to be in the specific ways, on specific grounds that's set out in the legislation. Again, this stuff is much better explained on our website. It goes into a lot more detail. There's very specific guidelines on how to kind of go through this process and how the landlord can respond, and what the categories are. So go and have a look at that, the fact sheet on our website, if you have questions specifically about your circumstances. But you can also challenge the landlord's reasons for saying that you can't have a pet. Even if it's within the legislated reasons, you can still challenge it. We've seen a few of those matters be challenged at the tribunal, and tenants have been successful and been allowed to have pets when they challenged the landlord's reasons. So you have to do that within 28 days of receiving the reason. Also, it's really important to understand that in New South Wales, a landlord can't say, can't advertise a property as pet free. So basically saying that you can't apply. You can always apply. You can always apply to have a pet. It's actually restricted. Landlords are not supposed to do that type of advertising. I'm sure they probably still do, but that doesn't mean that then once you're in the property, you still can't apply to have a pet. You still have that right.
Thanks. Oh, one more slide for you. What are the other changes in effect?
Yeah, so these are the ones that are, maybe not as flashy as the no grounds evictions and pets. Rent increases we've already spoken about. It's again, go and have a look at our website. Go and have a look at the fact sheet on renting. If you receive a rent increase notice, check the notice period, check the whether or not it's more than one rent increase in a 12-month period. If you go to our fact sheet, you can just go through the steps and make sure that it's valid, because if it's not valid, you don't have to pay the rent increase. So it's really important to check the details. It's not that real estate agents and landlords don't give these types of notices thinking that they can get away with it. They absolutely do. So you should always check the details of these notices. Do not take it for granted. A fee-free way to pay rent. Again, most people think that they have to pay the rent in the way that the real estate agent or the landlord tells them. That actually they have to provide you with a way to pay the rent that is in line with the legislation. So again, check that stuff. If it feels dodgy, if it feels like it's not right, check it. Go to our website, check it. Call a tenants advocate, check it. Okay, so background checks, that's pretty straightforward. You can't be expected to pay for a background check of yourself. Again, we know this stuff happens. You can just refuse it. You can agree to it if you want to, but you can't be forced to do it. Dual flush toilets. Yeah, so all residential properties have to have the water efficiency measures at the beginning of tenancies, and now that includes dual flush toilets.
And if you don't have a dual flush toilet, what's the consequence there?
Uh, I don't know if I can
A bit of a
blanketly say that this is what's going to happen, but there is potential that you won't have to pay for the responsibility to pay for water might be the landlord's responsibility if they haven't taken measures to ensure that there's those water efficiency um, standards, that those water efficiency standards are met. So, and that now includes dual flush toilets.
So in general, a water inefficient property, you can't be asked to pay the water charges, the water usage charges, which is
I would say
usually
that's
most
very
tenancies.
general.
Yeah.
Yes.
The So that's all the stuff that's come in place since, well, over the last year and a little bit. But there's a number of other changes that are coming up that are in progress. They might be in development. They might be still on their way. So we thought we'd just talk through some of these just to make sure that you know what's coming up, what's changing for renters, or at least we're pretty confident, about these things that they are more than just an idea in someone's mind. So smart rental bonds.
Is that
Uh,
me?
it can be me. So this was an election promise that the New South Wales Labor government brought in 2023. It's been an idea that's been around for a while, and essentially what it's trying to address is that there's hundreds of thousands of people, 330,000 renters moving each year, and often they're moving from one rental to another, which means that they have a bond for one property, and then they have to come up with a new bond for the next property, but you don't get the bond for the old place back before you move into the new one. So you end up having to have two bonds out in the system. And this is really inefficient and expensive. Moving's already an expensive time. It's already a stressful time. Having to come up with two bonds just makes it so much worse. And most people get their full bond back. The stats every year is that about 65% of renters get their full bond back at the end of the tenancy. About 10 to 15% don't receive their bond back, and the rest, it's something. There's a claim. Often it's a week or even less of a claim that comes out of the bond. So most bonds come back to tenants most of the time. This was an election promise. It took them quite a while to develop this portable bonds system, partly because the bond boards, the bond system that it's running on is actually quite old. The bond board's been running for, since the 1970s. The computer program running on it's newer than that, but it wasn't quite up to what they needed. So that's why we understand that it took a while. But just recently, a couple of months ago, the government announced that testing was beginning and that we think that in the second half of this year, that the full launch will happen. And smart rental bonds is essentially that when you're moving property, you'll be given the option to either claim your bond back or move it to a next property. And so when you have applied for a property, you've been approved, the agent makes a link in the bond system and asks you to pay the bond. And either you'll be able to pay it directly, just like before, or you'll be given the option, if you already have a bond, to transfer it. And that transfer means that you enter into an agreement with the government that they're transferring the bond provisionally, and any money that comes out of your old bond, you'll have to cover the difference, and you'll have to cover the difference between the higher rent. But otherwise, your old bond will then, once you do move out, will be shuffled across into the new bond, and you'll be covered without having had to come up with two bonds at the same time. So it's a really good idea. It will save people a lot of money, and will also make the process of claiming bonds and going through the evidence of, was it really dirty? Is there cleaning to be done? That's a lot easier because you won't have the pressure of feeling that you have to agree to a claim, a cleaning cost, or something that you don't really think is valid. You haven't seen any evidence for it. Because the transfer means that you've already covered your next property and you can take the time to challenge that claim if you need to. So we We're looking forward to seeing the smart rental bonds taking up in general. There is a $25 fee that they will charge for using the transfer that isn't in place at the moment. There's no costs around lodging bonds at the moment. And this is something that we're a bit worried about, particularly for people on lower incomes. Like I said, moving is already a tough time. It's already a stressful time. We think this fee isn't really justified, and we'll keep saying that we think the government should remove that fee or at least make sure that people on lower incomes on Centrelink aren't having to come up with it. But the system itself is still a really good idea. So we'll look forward to what happens in the future. Um, and I'll just answer Tamara's question that's come through just to quickly clarify. This is different to when you could, and you have always been able to, go to your landlord and ask to transfer the bond, or go to the landlord, go to the agent and ask to transfer the bond to a new property. And almost always they would say no, partly because they don't own the other property, they have no relationship with it, they don't want to give up that the ability to make the claim when the tenancy comes to an end. This is without input from your old landlord or from your new landlord. You can make the transfer, the portable bond, because what you're dealing with is the government. The government is essentially loaning you that money for a short period, and then you'll pay it back when the old bond comes out, or in a pretty short time frame. So there's a few bits and pieces around the smart rental bonds. We'll have fact sheets that come out that explain various bits. The government website, if you Google smart rental bonds, is quite comprehensive and explains it. But there are some people who won't be able to access it if you don't have online bonds. If you're moving as a small part of a share house, the whole share house isn't moving together. But for many people, it will be really useful.
Leo, did you see just as while you're on bonds,
Mm.
Shripart asked a question about getting paid out
The
the interest
interest.
on bonds after a 10-year period. Is that something that's on the horizon?
I reckon let's come back to that as part of
Sure.
discussion.
Yep.
It is worth saying that the legislation, the tenancy law, says that tenants receive interest, but that interest is calculated based on a particular Commonwealth Bank account, because they used to be publicly owned, and that interest account currently pays out 0% interest. So people who've had bonds in the system for a very long time might still receive a little bit of interest from before those interest rates fell, but anyone who's been doing it in the last 10, 15 years will see basically nothing.
Oh, that's
But
so
how
interesting
the
because I did
bond,
remember seeing it in the past, and then I wondered where it had gone. Yeah,
yeah.
that's interesting.
But let's talk at the end about
Yep.
how bonds are held and what they're used for. It's a
Yep.
really, yeah, it's a good chat. Uh, The other reforms still in progress, I'll just run through these as well. So the eviction register, since July last year, whenever a landlord ends a tenancy using one of those reasonable grounds that Liv talked through, or for any other reason, they actually have to tell the government that they've ended the tenancy for that reason. And so we're now seeing a big survey that happens every single time a landlord ends the tenancy and claims the bond. It's done through the bond system, where they have to say why. And so that's going to be a really powerful data set that will let people see why our tenancy is ending. And we've seen a little bit of, a preview from the government has put out some early figures, but they have to report each year saying what these changes are or what the results of that survey are. And we want to be able to see that data, get that data, and look at it for our own research to make sure that we can understand how things have changed. The government has also been showing that this eviction register has been extremely useful because they're tracking when properties go back up on realestate.com or on Domain, on those listing sites. That's the tool that they're using, is this asking landlords, why did you end the tenancy? And if it looks like it was a dodgy reason, they might be able to investigate through the listings. Uh, the data and privacy protections, there is a bill currently in Parliament that makes some really significant changes to how your information can be collected by agents, by landlords, by third parties when you're applying for properties, and puts in rules, makes sure that they all have to comply with the Australian privacy principles, which is a pretty powerful set of rules that uh, ensure that you can access data that's being held about you, that you can change it if it's inaccurate, and that it has to be stored securely and safely. So this is really significant. It's currently waiting to be passed in Parliament. We don't know the exact date that it might, but it's a really important one. That bill also has a few other things, little tweaks, and we hope that they'll also improve some of the pets provisions and some of the transparency. For instance, it also requires that if a landlord or agent uses AI or changes a photo in a listing digitally, that they have to acknowledge that they have to disclose that they actually aren't using a real picture. It's a modified one. Uh, but these current reforms don't touch a number of things that are important to people, don't change the level of rent, the amount of housing that's in there, or some of the basic kind of power imbalances that people focus. So there's a lot of areas where we can still improve renting, and we're going to get into that in our next section. The gaps that this law hasn't filled uh, include that we have put up some suggestions here. We've put up six things that really either tenants or tenant advocates have raised with the tenants union, have been saying this is a problem, this is something that we're facing and struggling with. Um, so rental affordability is the thing that just keeps coming up. People keep telling us about it, and essentially we need to see fairer rules for how much the rent can rise, not just how often. And we this is important because people shouldn't be losing their homes to out of control rents. Um, we need to also see stronger enforcement of the rules. A lot of the way the tenancy law is set up is that the onus, the hard work has to be done by renters to challenge bad practices, whether that's from serving a dodgy notice where it doesn't look like it's going to be genuine. If you need to prevent an eviction, that's on you. Government might be tracking it after the fact, but you've already lost your home. But it's also true about repairs, that there are ways for people to bring up repairs, to make complaints, but it is the tenant who has to do the heavy lifting, who has to do the hard work to raise the issue. So we need to see stronger enforcement where less of that burden is held by a tenant who is at risk of maybe being kicked out, maybe gets a bad reference from into the future, maybe is just harassed and put under pressure to not raise issues. We need to make sure that people have access to those tenant advocates. Liv talks about, and it's absolutely true, tenant advocates are there available to talk to people, but there are not enough tenant advocates for the number of renters in New South Wales who are facing some of these issues. And we can't do all the work that we need to. So advocates help people through really difficult situations, whether that's through advice and talking it through, or potentially representing some people in the tribunal. We prevent evictions, we prevent homelessness by making sure that people have the protection against that through formal and informal processes. And fundamentally, it's about having someone who can sit on your side, who can understand what's happening in these disputes, and make sure that tenants understand, can make choices that are right for them in the situation. People need we need to address finding a new home. So that rental application reform's long overdue. It's been an area where people have been reporting feeling so uncomfortable about the amount of information being collected about them, why it is, how it's being used, and how safe it is. And so it's really important that current bill that's in Parliament gets passed. There are, potentially good amendments to it around pets, but we really want to see Parliament get moving on actually passing the bill. It's called the Protection of Personal Information Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill. we need to make sure that homes meet a certain standard, that they are safe, that they're healthy places to be. This is our shelter. This is where we need to go to be protected from the elements, not have the elements come in and make us cold, make us wet, make us moldy, all that kind of thing. So there's a range of basic habitability standards that need to be in place that make sure that homes are energy efficient, they can heat us, cool us, but also that they are safe places. And there are already requirements in the Act around some of these features, but they don't go far enough, and they're often for a tenant to enforce as a contract term that you need to go to the tribunal, need to make a complaint to fair trading. These should be standards that every property complies with before anyone's put at risk. And we need to make sure that there's more genuinely affordable housing all over the place, that there's more public housing as well as community housing built near where people work and live. And the capital A, capital H affordable housing that you see in developments, we need to make sure that if that's continuing, that it's actually affordable, that it responds to people's real circumstances, that it's not, put at the top level of the market rent and then reduced, because that means that if rents went up 10, 15, 20% in a year, which we saw only a couple of years ago, then the affordable housing rent also goes up that fast, and the people who could just about afford it can't, and no one on lower income is getting any benefit from it. So more genuinely affordable housing. So these are some of our positions. As I said, that we've heard from renters, from renter advocates that are so important. But we really want to hear also about how do these land with you? Are these important issues for you? And I think we have a survey that will go up to let you tell us, which of those things is important. And if there's something else, then you can put that into the text box so that we're capturing everything that's there. So
Yeah. So if you receive a notice of termination, if you receive a rent increase, if you have put in a pet application and it's come back with reasons, it doesn't seem right. You've read some information online. It's not quite gelling for you. Call the Tenants Advice and Advocacy Service, get some specific advice to your circumstances. We also have an advice line at the Tenants Union on Monday mornings and Thursday afternoons that's statewide. And also Fair Trading has quite a lot of resources. So there's fact sheets on our website, tenants.org.au.
great. So thanks again for everyone who's been here. I hope that was really useful for you. We'll follow up with some extra information and things coming out of this. But thank you all for the time, and hope to see you at another webinar or event shortly. And now we'll hang around a little bit and answer some extra questions.